The woman who stepped off the westbound stage in Verdi, Nevada that September morning in 1872 looked like she had been traveling for a month straight, and Yates Johnson figured she probably had. He watched from his position outside the general store, arms crossed over his broad chest as she descended with a single worn carpetbag and surveyed the dusty main street with eyes that held equal parts exhaustion and determination. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins during the journey, and her simple gray dress bore the dust of 1,000 miles. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with a face that might have been pretty if it was not so drawn with fatigue and something deeper, something that looked like grief. Yates had been coming down from his mountain cabin more frequently these past few weeks, trading pelts and restocking supplies before winter set in proper. At 30 years old, he had spent the better part of the last 8 years in these mountains, preferring the company of silence and solitude to the noise of civilization. His shoulders were broad as an axe handle, muscles built from years of hauling traps and splitting wood and wrestling nature into submission. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his beard was neatly trimmed, framing a face that was weathered but strong. Most folks in Verdi knew him by reputation only, the mountain man who lived somewhere up in the high country with his hunting dogs, a man who could track anything that moved and survive conditions that would kill lesser men. The woman took 3 steps toward the boardwalk, and then her knees simply buckled. Yates moved without thinking, his long legs covering the distance in seconds, catching her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and up close he could see the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He had not spoken to another person in nearly 2 weeks. "When did you last eat?" And he found himself looking into pools of striking blue. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was weak. "Just tired, I can stand." "You can try," Yates said, but he did not release her yet. "But you are going to fall right back down if you do." A small crowd had gathered, as crowds did in small towns when anything out of the ordinary occurred. Martha Reynolds, who ran the boarding house with her husband Tom, pushed through with the determined efficiency of a woman who had raised 6 children and brooked no nonsense from anyone. "Bring her to the boarding house," Martha said. "Lord above, the poor thing looks half-starved. Tom, stop gawking and help." Yates shifted the woman's weight more securely in his arms and followed Martha down the street. The woman in his arms had gone still, not fighting him, which told him more about her condition than any words could. People did not surrender easily unless they had been pushed well past their limits. The boarding house was one of the nicer buildings in Verdi, a 2-story structure with actual glass windows and a coat of white paint that Martha insisted Tom refresh every spring. Inside it smelled like baking bread and lye soap, the sense of civilization that always made Yates feel slightly out of place. Martha directed him to a room on the 1st floor, a small space with a narrow bed and a washstand, and he laid the woman down gently on the quilt. "I will fetch some broth," Martha said. "You stay here in case she faints again. Tom, get Dr. Harrison." Yates pulled the room's single chair closer to the bed and sat, his large frame making the furniture look like a child's toy. The woman's eyes had closed again, but her breathing was steady. He found himself studying her face, the fine bones and the way her lashes lay dark against her pale skin. There was strength there beneath the exhaustion, something in the set of her jaw that spoke of stubbornness and will. Her eyes opened suddenly, catching him watching. "You can go," she said. "I'm sure you have other things to do than watch over a stranger." "Not particularly," Yates said. It was true. He had been planning to head back up to his cabin today, but something made him want to ensure this woman was actually all right before he disappeared into the mountains again. "What brings you to Verdi?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I'm starting over. My husband died 6 months ago, cholera. We had a small farm in Missouri, but after he passed, his brother claimed it should go to him since there were no children. The law agreed." Her voice was matter of fact, but Yates heard the hurt beneath it. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "My name is Beatrice Nolan," she said, "and I appreciate your help, Mr. Johnson." "Yates Johnson. Most folks just call me Yates." "Well, Mr. Johnson, I truly can stand now." She pushed herself up on her elbows as if to prove it, and though she swayed slightly, she managed to sit upright. "See?" Martha bustled back in with a bowl of broth and a thick slice of bread. "You will eat every bit of this," she said in a tone that expected no argument. "And then you will rest. When did you last have a proper meal, child?" "I ate yesterday." Beatrice said, taking the bowl with hands that shook slightly. What did you eat? Half an apple and some hardtack. Martha made a disgusted sound. That is not eating, that is starving slowly. You will stay here tonight, and we will settle the payment later. Right now you need food and sleep. Beatrice's spine straightened. I can pay. I have money. Not much, but enough for a few nights' lodging while I find work. What kind of work are you looking for? Yates asked. Anything honest, Beatrice said. She sipped the broth and some color began returning to her cheeks. I can cook, clean, sew. I can read and write and do figures. I worked as a teacher for 2 years before I married. The school here already has a teacher, Martha said thoughtfully. But I know Mary Chen at the restaurant has been looking for help. Her daughter just got married and moved to Carson City, and the Reverend's wife might need someone to help with the church cleaning. I will ask around. Dr. Harrison arrived, a thin man with spectacles and gentle hands, and shooed both Yates and Martha out of the room while he examined his patient. They stood in the hallway, Martha with her arms crossed and a speculative look on her face that Yates had learned to be wary of. That is a brave young woman, Martha said. Coming all this way alone after losing her husband and her home both. Brave or desperate, Yates said. Sometimes those are the same thing. Martha studied him with eyes that missed nothing. You have been coming down from that mountain of yours more often lately. Getting lonely up there? Just needed supplies. Martha's tone suggested she did not believe him for a second. You know, Yates Johnson, you cannot hide in those mountains forever. You are only 30 years old. That is too young to be living like a hermit. I'm not a hermit. I come to town. Twice a year does not count. You need people. Everyone needs people. Yates did not argue because there was no point arguing with Martha Reynolds. Besides, there was some truth to what she said, though he would not admit it. The winters were getting longer, or maybe he was just getting more aware of the silence. He had gone up into the mountains 8 years ago after his father died, leaving him the small cabin and trap lines. It had been meant as a temporary escape, a season or two to clear his head and figure out his next step. But seasons became years, and the mountain had become home. Dr. Harrison emerged from the room. She is suffering from exhaustion and malnutrition, but nothing that food and rest will not cure. She told me she has been traveling for 28 days and spent most of her money on the stagecoach fare. A few good meals and she should be fine. He looked at Martha. Make sure she eats and keep her in bed for at least a day. I will watch her like a hawk. Martha promised. Yates realized he had no real reason to stay, yet he found himself reluctant to leave. Tell her, he started then stopped. Tell her if she needs anything she can ask for me. I will be in town for a few more days. Martha's eyes lit up with interest, but she simply nodded. I will tell her. Yates walked back to the general store where his pack mule was tied, his mind still on the woman with the blue eyes and the determined jaw. He had learned long ago not to get involved in other people's problems. The mountain taught you to be self-reliant, to depend only on yourself. But something about Beatrice Nolan had gotten under his skin in the space of half an hour. He spent the rest of the day trading pelts and restocking his supplies. And then he did something he almost never did. He rented a room at the boarding house. Martha raised her eyebrows but did not comment, just handed him a key to a room on the second floor. That evening he saw Beatrice in the dining room, seated at the long table with the other boarders. She had washed and changed into a different dress, still plain but clean, and her hair was pinned up properly. She looked better, less like she might collapse at any moment. When she saw him, she nodded politely, and he returned the gesture before taking a seat at the far end of the table. Martha served dinner family style, platters of roast chicken and potatoes and green beans, and Yates noticed that Beatrice ate slowly but steadily, as if for fear of making herself sick. The other boarders made conversation around her, asking the usual questions about where she was from and what brought her to Verdi, and she answered with polite reserve. After dinner, Yates went out to the porch to smoke his pipe and found Beatrice there already, standing at the railing and looking out at the darkening street. The sun had dropped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Feeling better? He asked. She turned, and in the fading light, her face looked softer, younger. Much better, thank you. Mrs. Reynolds told me what you did this morning. I appreciate it. Anyone would have done the same. Maybe. But you were the one who actually did it. She paused. She also said you live up in the mountains. Are you a prospector? Trapper. Hunter. I have a cabin about 15 miles northeast of here, up where the pine forests get thick. That sounds isolated. That is the point. She smiled slightly at that. I can understand the appeal of isolation. People can be complicated. Animals are simpler, Yates agreed. They do not lie or cheat or try to take what is not theirs. Something flickered in her eyes, and he realized his words had touched on her own experience. Before he could apologize, she spoke again. Mrs. Reynolds said you might know if anyone in the area needs help. She is asking around, but I thought I would ask you as well. Yates considered. The truth was he could use help. His cabin was in decent repair, but there was always work to be done before winter, and his attempts at cooking resulted in meals that were functional but grim. More than that, there was the matter of his dogs. He had 3 hunting dogs, all blue-tick coonhounds he had acquired as puppies 2 years ago. They were good dogs, smart and loyal, but they were also stubborn as mules and had never fully accepted his authority. He had spent countless hours trying to train them properly, but while they would follow basic commands about half the time, they were unreliable when it mattered most. On a hunt, they would tree a cougar or track a deer beautifully, but they would also take off after rabbits when he needed them focused, or refuse to come when called if they found something more interesting. It frustrated him to no end because he knew they were capable of better. But the idea of inviting a woman to his cabin, a woman he had just met, seemed improper at best and dangerous at worst. Mountain life was hard and the cabin was remote. If something went wrong, there would be no help coming. I might know of something, he said carefully, but I need to think on it. She nodded, not pushing. Well, if you think of anything, please let me know. I'm willing to work hard. That night, Yates lay in his rented bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for sleep. He thought about his cabin, about the coming winter, about the dogs who would not mind him no matter how he tried. And he thought about Beatrice Nolan, who had crossed half a continent alone to start over after losing everything. By morning, he had made his decision, though he suspected it might be a foolish one. He found Beatrice after breakfast, helping Martha clear the dishes, despite the older woman's protests that she was a guest and should rest. "Can I talk to you?" Yates asked. They went out to the porch again, and he noticed that she looked even better today. Her color restored and her movements steadier. She waited for him to speak, her blue eyes attentive. "I have a proposition," Yates said, "and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer, because it is not a conventional arrangement." She folded her hands and waited. "I live alone in my cabin, and winters up there are hard. I could use help with cooking and maintaining the place, and there is other work too. I would pay fair wages, room and board plus $20 a month, but here is the thing. The cabin is isolated. It is a half-day's ride from town, and once the snow comes, it can be hard to get down the mountain. You would essentially be stuck there until spring." "Stuck there with you," Beatrice said. "A man I met yesterday, yes." Yates kept his voice level, "which is why I would understand if you said no, but I give you my word that you would be safe. I would sleep in the lean-to I built for storage, and you would have the cabin to yourself at night. Mrs. Reynolds knows me, and so does half the town. They will tell you I am not the kind of man who would take advantage." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. "Why me?" she finally asked. "If you need help, surely there are other options, because you need work and I need help, and because I think you are tough enough to handle mountain life." He paused. "There is one more thing. I have 3 hunting dogs. Good dogs, but I have spent 2 years trying to train them properly and they still will not mind me the way they should. If you came up to help, I would appreciate any insight you might have on that front." "You want me to train your dogs? I want you to try. I am clearly doing something wrong, but I cannot figure out what." A spark of interest showed in her eyes. "I grew up with dogs. My father bred hunting hounds back in Ohio. I probably spent more time in the kennels than I did in the house as a child. Then you know more than I do." She turned to look out at the street, and he could almost see her weighing the options. Stay in town where work might be scarce and money even scarcer, or go up into the mountains with a stranger and hope his word was good. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "and it does not work out for whatever reason, you would bring me back to town?" "On my honor." "And you truly would sleep in the lean-to?" "I give you my word." She turned back to him, and he saw that the determination he had noticed yesterday was stronger now, backed by returning strength. "Then I accept your proposition, Mr. Johnson. When would we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. If you are up for the ride, I will be ready." Yates spent the rest of the day making preparations, purchasing additional supplies, and ensuring his mule was ready for the journey. He also made a point of speaking with Martha Reynolds, explaining the arrangement in detail. Martha listened with pursed lips and then sighed. I suppose it is not entirely proper, but these are hard times and unusual circumstances. The girl needs work and you need help, and I know you are an honorable man, Yates Johnson. She fixed him with a stern look. But if I hear otherwise, I will come up that mountain myself and take a switch to you, understand? Understood. And you make sure she comes down to visit before the snow gets too deep. I want to see with my own eyes that she is all right. I will bring her down in a month, Yates promised. That evening, he explained the arrangement to a few other townsfolk, making sure there were witnesses to the terms. The last thing he needed was rumors that could damage Beatrice's reputation or his own. Most people seemed to accept it as the practical arrangement it was, though he caught a few knowing looks that suggested they suspected something more might develop. Yates did not let himself think about that possibility. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She needed work, he needed help, and they would coexist in the cabin until spring and then go their separate ways. They left Verdi at dawn. Yates on his sturdy mountain horse and Beatrice on a gentle mare he had borrowed from the livery with a promise to return it in the spring. Her carpet bag was tied behind her saddle, and she sat the horse well, comfortable in the saddle despite her ordeal of the past weeks. The trail up into the mountains was rough, barely more than a game path in places, and they rode in silence for the most part. Yates pointed out landmarks as they went, showing her how to recognize the route in case she ever needed to find her way down alone. The forest closed in around them as they climbed, ponderosa pines giving way to lodgepole, and then to the darker spruce and fir of the high country. Around midday, they stopped beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat the lunch Martha had packed for them. Beatrice sat on a fallen log and looked around at the wilderness with an expression that Yates could not quite read. It is beautiful, she said finally. Wild but beautiful. Wait until winter, Yates said. Then it is wild and trying to kill you. She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face and made her look younger and lighter, as if some of the grief had lifted. I am harder to kill than I look. I believe that. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon, and Yates tried to see it through her eyes. It was a simple structure, one large room with a stone fireplace at one end and a sleeping loft above. He had built it himself, using logs from the surrounding forest, and it was solid and weatherproof even if it was not fancy. There was a lean-to attached to one side for storage and tools, and a small barn that housed his horse and mule, and currently the 3 dogs. As they approached, he heard the dogs begin to bark, a chorus of deep baying that echoed through the trees. Beatrice's head came up, interested. That is them, Yates said. Rufus, Boone, and Tracker. I should warn you, they are friendly but enthusiastic. He dismounted and went to open the barn, and the 3 blue-tick coonhounds came boiling out in a mass of wagging tails and lolling tongues. They were beautiful dogs, their coats a mottled blue-gray with tan markings, their long ears swinging as they bounded around the clearing. They jumped on Yates, ignored his commands to sit, and then caught sight of Beatrice and raced toward her. Yates started to call them back, but Beatrice had already slid off her horse and dropped to one knee. The dogs surrounded her, and instead of being overwhelmed, she laughed. Actually laughed, a sound of pure joy, and began greeting each dog in turn, letting them sniff her hands and then running her fingers over their ears and along their flanks, murmuring to them in a low, steady voice. Hello, you handsome boy, she said to Rufus, the largest of the 3. And you are a sweetheart, are you not? This to Boone, who was already on his back demanding a belly rub. And you must be the smart one. Tracker, the smallest but the one with the keenest nose, sat in front of her and offered a paw, which she took with grave ceremony. Yates stood there with the horse's reins in his hands and watched in amazement. The dogs were always friendly, but this was different. They were not just greeting her. They were responding to something in her manner, in her voice. When she stood and walked toward the cabin, all 3 dogs fell into step beside her, not jumping or running ahead, but walking calmly as if they had known her for years. What did you do? Yates asked. Beatrice looked back at him, surprised. Nothing. I just said hello. They never do that. They never just walk calmly. They are always running around like their tails are on fire. Maybe they are just excited about having a visitor. But she looked pleased, and when she reached down to pat Rufus's head, the big dog leaned against her leg with a contented sigh. Yates showed her around the cabin, pointing out where things were kept and explaining the routine he followed. The interior was sparse but clean, with a sturdy table and chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves lined with supplies, and his bedroll in the loft. A ladder led up to the sleeping area, and he had already moved his things out to the lean-to that morning before coming down to town. "It is not much," he said, "but it is warm and dry. It is perfect," Beatrice said, and seemed to mean it. She set her carpet bag on the table and looked around with the air of someone taking inventory. "Where do you keep the dog food?" He showed her the barrel of dried meat and the sacks of cornmeal he mixed with it. "I feed them once a day, usually in the evening. But they are hunters, so they often catch their own meals too. They are too thin," Beatrice said immediately. "Not dangerously so, but they should have more weight on them. I would recommend feeding them twice a day, morning and evening, at least until they fill out a bit more." Yates frowned. He had not noticed the dogs being thin, but now that she mentioned it, he could see that their ribs were more prominent than they should be. "I did not realize. It is easy to miss if you see them every day." She knelt again, and Tracker came to her immediately, putting his head under her hand. "You are also feeding them separately?" "No, all together. Rufus is dominant, so he is probably eating more than his share. The other two are getting pushed out. Feed them in separate corners, and make sure each dog gets his full portion." It made sense, and Yates felt foolish for not figuring it out himself. He had been so focused on trying to make them obey commands that he had missed basic care issues. "What else am I doing wrong?" Beatrice stood and faced him, and he saw that same thoughtfulness from the porch in Verdi. "May I watch you work with them tomorrow? It is easier to see what is happening than to guess." "Fair enough." They spent the rest of the evening settling in. Beatrice cooked dinner, a simple meal of beans and salt pork, but she somehow made it taste better than anything Yates had managed in months. After they ate, she took the scraps out to the dogs and fed them separately as she had suggested, and Yates watched from the doorway as all three dogs settled down to eat without any of the usual squabbling. As darkness fell, Yates retreated to the lean-to with his bedroll and a lantern. The space was cramped but adequate, and he had made it comfortable enough with some straw and a thick bearskin. He lay there listening to the night sounds of the forest and thought about the strange turn his life had taken. 2 days ago he had been alone, as he had been for years. Now there was a woman in his cabin, cooking his food and talking to his dogs, and somehow it felt less like an intrusion, and more like something that had been missing finally falling into place. He did not let himself examine that feeling too closely. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of mountain dawn that turned the sky gold and made the frost on the grass sparkle like diamonds. Yates woke to the smell of coffee and found that Beatrice was already up, had stoked the fire, and was cooking breakfast. The dogs were sitting in a neat row outside the door, waiting patiently instead of their usual chaos. "How did you manage that?" he asked, accepting the cup of coffee she poured him. "I told them to wait." She said it as if it was the simplest thing in the world. "Dogs want to please you, but they need to understand what you are asking. Clear communication, consistent rules, and patience." After breakfast, Yates took her and the dogs out to the clearing where he usually did training. He went through his normal routine, calling the dogs, telling them to sit, to stay, to come. They obeyed maybe half the time, and when they did not, he found himself getting frustrated, his voice getting sharper. Beatrice watched without comment until he finally threw up his hands in defeat. "You see? They just will not listen. May I try something?" He gestured for her to go ahead, expecting her to call the dogs and run through commands the same way he had. Instead, she walked to the center of the clearing and simply stood there, relaxed and calm. The dogs, who had been milling around ignoring Yates's last command to sit, looked at her. "Rufus," she said in that same low, steady voice she had used yesterday. "Come." The big dog came immediately, trotting over to sit in front of her. She touched his head briefly, said, "Good boy," and then called Boone. He came just as readily. Tracker followed without even being called. "Sit," she said, and all three dogs sat. "Stay." She walked away and they stayed, their eyes following her but their bodies motionless. "Come." They came as a unit, perfectly synchronized. Yates stared. "How?" Beatrice returned to his side, the dogs following and then sitting when she stopped. "You are tense when you work with them. They can feel it, and it makes them anxious. Anxious dogs do not learn well. You also change your tone depending on whether they obey or not, which confuses them. They do not know if you are asking or demanding, and they do not know what will happen if they do not comply. So what do I do? First, relax. They are not your enemies. They want to please you, but they need to trust that you are in control and that they are safe. Second, be absolutely consistent. The command is always the same word in the same tone. When they obey, reward them with praise or a treat. When they do not, there is no anger, just a calm correction and repeat the command. They will learn, but it takes time. She spent the next hour working with him and the dogs, showing him how to modulate his voice, how to read the dog's body language, how to reward success immediately so they connected the action with the praise. It was humbling to realize how much he had been doing wrong, but Beatrice never made him feel stupid. She was patient with him the same way she was patient with the dogs, understanding that learning took time. By the end of the session, Yates could see a difference. The dogs were responding more consistently, and he was beginning to understand the subtle communication that was happening. It was not about dominance or force. It was about clarity and trust. "They are good dogs," Beatrice said as they walked back to the cabin. "You did well choosing them. They just needed someone who spoke their language. That someone appears to be you." She smiled. "I had good teachers. My father used to say that training dogs was 90% about training yourself. The dog is just responding to what you are putting out into the world." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Mornings began with dog training, both of them working together now, with Beatrice coaching and Yates practicing. The improvement was remarkable. Within a week, the dogs were responding to his commands almost as well as they did to hers. Within 2 weeks, they were reliable enough that he felt comfortable taking them on a hunt. They went out at dawn, tracking a small herd of elk that had been moving through the area. The dogs worked beautifully, staying close when needed, ranging ahead to scout when given the command, and coming immediately when called. When Rufus treed a mountain lion by mistake, Yates was able to call him back before the situation turned dangerous. It was the kind of control he had been dreaming about for 2 years. They brought down a young bull elk, and the dogs helped track and guard the carcass while Yates field dressed it. On the way back to the cabin, he found himself whistling, something he had not done in years. Beatrice was delighted with the fresh meat, and they spent the afternoon butchering and preserving it, hanging strips to dry and packing others in salt. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that felt companionable rather than empty. "You were right about the dogs," Yates said as they worked. "They just needed better training. Or rather, I needed better training." "You are a quick learner," Beatrice said, "and you care about doing right by them. That is what matters most." It occurred to Yates that he had not felt this content in a very long time. The cabin, which had always been merely functional, now felt like a home. There was good food on the table, the dogs were happy and well trained, and there was someone to talk to in the evenings. Beatrice had a quiet sense of humor that emerged once she felt comfortable, and she was well read, able to discuss books and ideas with an intelligence that challenged him in the best way. He found himself noticing other things too. The way lamplight caught in her hair, turning it gold. The sound of her laugh, which came more frequently as the days passed and the shadows lifted from her eyes. The graceful efficiency of her movements as she worked. She was beautiful, he realized, and not just in appearance. There was a strength and kindness in her that drew him like a magnet. He tried not to think about it. This was a business arrangement, and she was a woman still in mourning for her husband. It would be wrong to let himself feel anything beyond friendship and respect. But the heart, he was learning, did not always listen to reason. A month after they had arrived at the cabin, Yates kept his promise to Martha Reynolds and took Beatrice back down to Verdi for a visit. They rode down through forests that were starting to show the first hints of autumn color, the aspens turning gold against the evergreen backdrop. Martha took one look at Beatrice and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You look wonderful," she said. "Healthy and happy." "I was worried, I admit it, but I can see that Yates has kept his word." "He has been nothing but a gentleman," Beatrice assured her. "And the work is good. I like the mountain." They spent the day in town, with Beatrice visiting the general store and the church and catching up with the few people she had met during her brief stay. Yates noticed that several men watched her with interest, including Jack Porter, who owned the sawmill, and Daniel Wright, who worked as a deputy. Both men were young and reasonably prosperous, the kind of men a woman in Beatrice's situation might consider as potential suitors. The thought made something dark and possessive coil in Yates's chest, which he immediately tried to suppress. He had no right to feel territorial. Beatrice was free to talk to whoever she wanted, and if she found someone who interested her, that was her business. But when Daniel Wright offered to buy her dinner at the restaurant, and she politely declined, saying she and Yates needed to start back before dark, that dark feeling eased into something warmer. They made camp halfway up the mountain that night, since riding in darkness was dangerous. Yates built a fire and they sat beside it, sharing dried meat and watching sparks spiral up into the star-filled sky. "Daniel Wright seems like a nice man," Yates said, then immediately wanted to kick himself. Why had he brought that up? "He does," Beatrice agreed, "but I am not interested." "Why not?" The question was out before he could stop it. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Because I am tired of forcing things that do not fit. My marriage was like that. Robert was a good man and I cared for him, but we were never truly suited to each other. I married him because it seemed like the practical thing to do and because I thought I should want what everyone else wanted. A home, a husband, children. And I did want those things, but I wanted them with the right person, and Robert was not that person. We both knew it, though we never said it out loud." "I'm sorry," Yates said. "Do not be. We had 3 years together, and we were kind to each other. That is more than many people get. But when he died, along with the grief, there was also this terrible relief, and I felt so guilty about that. It felt like a sin to be relieved that my husband was dead." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I came west because I needed to start fresh, to figure out who I am when I am not trying to be what everyone expects. Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Yates said. He poked at the fire, sending up another shower of sparks. "I came up to the mountain for the same reason. My father died and left me his cabin and his traplines, and everyone expected me to sell them, move to Sacramento or San Francisco, find a wife and settle down proper, but I could not make myself want that life. So I ran away to the mountain instead." "You did not run away. You chose a different path. Some might say that is the same thing. Then those people do not understand the difference between running away and running toward." He looked at her across the fire, this woman who had appeared in his life barely 6 weeks ago and somehow changed everything. "What are you running toward, Beatrice?" She smiled, soft and thoughtful. "I am not sure yet, but I think I will know it when I find it." They sat in comfortable silence after that, and when Beatrice finally retreated to her bedroll, Yates lay awake long into the night, thinking about paths and choices and the terrifying possibility that what he was running toward might be sitting right across the fire from him. Autumn deepened into early winter, and the first snows came to the high country. Yates had been through 7 winters in the cabin, but this one felt different, where before the snow had meant isolation and silence broken only by the wind and the occasional cry of an animal. Now there was warmth and companionship. Beatrice proved to be as resilient as he had suspected, adapting to mountain life with a practical competence that impressed him daily. She had taken over not just the cooking, but much of the daily management of their small homestead. She organized their supplies, rotated their stores to prevent spoilage, and even improved the cabin's defenses against the cold by mixing clay and moss to seal gaps in the log walls. She also continued working with the dogs, advancing their training to the point where they could execute complex commands, and even do simple tasks like carrying messages between the cabin and the barn. One morning, Yates watched as Beatrice sent Tracker to fetch a pair of gloves she had left in the barn. The dog trotted off, returned with the gloves in his mouth, and deposited them at her feet with clear pride in his accomplishment. "I have been trying to teach them that for a year," Yates said, shaking his head in amazement. "How did you do it?" "Patience and repetition," Beatrice said, scratching behind Tracker's ears. "And understanding what motivates each dog. Tracker likes to please people. Boone likes treats. Rufus likes praise. So I use different rewards for different dogs." "You should be training dogs professionally. You have a gift," she laughed. "Maybe in my next life. In this one, I am content being a mountain hermit's assistant." "Is that what you are?" The question came out more serious than he had intended, and Beatrice looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I am not sure what I am," she said quietly. "But I know I am happier than I have been in a long time." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things unsaid, and Yates found himself leaning slightly toward her. Then Boone barked, chasing a snowshoe hare that had been foolish enough to hop through the clearing, and the spell broke. But something had shifted. Yates felt it, and he thought Beatrice did too. They were more aware of each other now, hyper-conscious of accidental touches and lingering glances. When he came in from checking the trap lines with snow in his hair and beard, she would brush it away without thinking, her fingers gentle on his face. When she reached for something on a high shelf, he would appear behind her to help, and they would stand close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. The lean-to was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, both because of the cold and because Yates found himself reluctant to leave the cabin each night. He told himself it was because the cabin was warmer, but he knew the truth. He wanted to be near Beatrice, to extend their evenings together for as long as possible. One night, a blizzard rolled in with terrifying speed. Yates had been out checking a trapline and barely made it back to the cabin before the full force of the storm hit. He burst through the door coated in snow, his hands numb and his face stinging from the wind-driven ice. Beatrice took one look at him and went into action. She pulled him to the fireplace, helped him out of his frozen outer clothes, and wrapped him in a blanket while she prepared hot coffee. The dogs clustered around him, adding their body heat and gradually feeling returned to his extremities in painful prickles. "That was foolish," Beatrice said, her voice sharp with fear. "You could have died out there. I know. I misread the weather." His hands shook as he took the coffee cup from her. "Thank you." She knelt beside him, and he saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You scared me," she said. "When the storm came up and you were not back yet, I thought." "I'm all right," he said. "I'm here." Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and driving snow through every tiny crack. The temperature was dropping fast, and even with the fire roaring, cold seeped into the cabin. "You cannot go to the lean-to tonight," Beatrice said. "You will freeze." Yates wanted to argue, but she was right. The lean-to would be dangerously cold in this storm. "I will sleep by the fire." "That is still too cold. The loft will be warmer." She saw him start to protest and held up a hand. "I trust you, Yates, and we are both adults. We can share a sleeping space for one night without impropriety." So they did. Beatrice took the bedroll she had been using in the loft's corner, and Yates spread his own bedroll on the opposite side. It was awkward at first, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence, but exhaustion eventually won out. The last thing Yates remembered before sleep claimed him was the sound of Beatrice's steady breathing, and the warmth that came from not being alone. He woke once in the deep night to find that they had both shifted in sleep, gravitating toward each other for warmth. Beatrice was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and his arm had come around her. It felt natural, right? As if they had been sleeping this way for years. He knew he should move, put proper distance between them, but he could not make himself do it. Instead, he let himself have this one moment of peace, and drifted back to sleep with her scent in his lungs and her warmth along his side. Morning brought clarity and awkwardness in equal measure. They woke tangled together, and Beatrice pulled away quickly, her cheeks flushed. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to." "It is all right," Yates said. "We were cold, it was just practical." But they both knew it had been more than that. The storm blew itself out by afternoon, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. They did not speak about that night, but something had changed irrevocably. The careful distance they had maintained was gone, and neither of them seemed interested in rebuilding it. Yates stopped sleeping in the lean-to. They agreed, with a sort of unspoken understanding, that the loft was more practical, especially as winter deepened. They maintained separate bedrolls at first, but gradually, naturally, they began sleeping closer together. It started as shared warmth on the coldest nights and evolved into something neither of them named but both of them wanted. One evening in mid-December, they sat by the fire after dinner, Beatrice reading aloud from one of the books she had brought with her while Yates repaired a snowshoe. The dogs were sprawled around them in various states of repose, completely content. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, and Yates realized with a start that he could not imagine his life without this anymore. "Beatrice," he said, interrupting her reading. She looked up, marking her place with a finger. "Yes, I have been thinking." He set aside the snowshoe, needing to give this his full attention. "About what you said that night by the campfire. About running towards something and knowing it when you found it." "I remember. I think I have found what I was running toward, or rather, she found me." Beatrice's breath caught and the book in her hands trembled slightly. "Yates, I know it has not been that long. I know you are still in mourning, and I know this was supposed to be just a business arrangement. But I cannot pretend anymore that I do not care for you, Beatrice. Somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my world, and if that is not what you want, if you need me to keep my distance, I will. But I had to tell you the truth." She set the book aside carefully, her movements deliberate, and then she turned to face him fully. Her eyes were bright with emotion, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "When I came west, I thought I was done with love. I thought I had tried it and it had not worked, and that was that. But then you caught me when I fell. and you brought me to your mountain, and you gave me space to heal and to find myself again. You have been kind and patient and honorable, and somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as my employer or even my friend. I see you now as the man I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my life." Yates felt something in his chest expand, too large and too bright to be contained. "Are you sure? I am not an easy man to live with. I am rough around the edges. And I spend too much time in my own head, and this mountain can be a hard place. I have never been more sure of anything." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. "I love you, Yates Johnson. Not because you are easy, but because you are real. You are exactly who you are, with no pretense or performance. You are strong and steady and good, and I feel safe with you in a way I have never felt safe with anyone else." He pulled her to him then, and she came willingly, settling into his arms as if she had always belonged there. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey, like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Her lips were soft and her hands were gentle on his face, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and smiling. "I love you," he said again, because now that he had said it once, he wanted to say it 1,000 more times. "I love you, Beatrice Nolan, and I want you to stay here with me. Not as my employee, but as my wife, if you will have me." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married in January during a brief break in the weather that allowed them to ride down to Verdi. Martha Reynolds wept happy tears and insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house, and half the town turned out to celebrate. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with Reverend Thompson officiating, and when Yates placed his mother's gold wedding band on Beatrice's finger, he felt his throat close with emotion. "I never thought I would use this," he admitted later, as they prepared to ride back up to the cabin. "I figured I would die alone on the mountain. Now you will die old and happy in our cabin, surrounded by grandchildren," Beatrice said, kissing him. "But not for many, many years." They returned to the mountain as husband and wife, and if life had been good before, it became extraordinary now. Freed from the constraints of propriety, they could be fully themselves with each other. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared dreams and fears they had never spoken aloud, and learned each other's bodies with a tenderness and passion that left them both amazed. Beatrice had been right about the dogs, too. By the time spring came and the snow began to melt, Rufus, Boone, and Tracker were perfectly trained hunting dogs, responding to Yates's commands with the same reliability they had shown to Beatrice from the start. More than that, they had become a pack, the 5 of them, moving through the mountain seasons as a unit. In April, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one morning over breakfast, her eyes dancing with joy and nervousness, and he picked her up and spun her around the cabin, laughing like a madman while the dogs barked in excitement. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A baby?" "In late autumn, I think," Beatrice said. "October or early November." They began preparing immediately, Yates building a cradle from smooth pine and Beatrice sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric Martha sent up from town. As her belly grew round, Yates became fiercely protective, insisting she rest more and work less, until she finally put her foot down and told him she was pregnant, not fragile. "I carried water and chopped wood when I was 8 months pregnant before," she said firmly. "I can certainly continue cooking and tending the cabin. That was different." "How?" "Because now you are my wife, and I love you too much to risk anything happening to you." Her expression softened. "Nothing will happen to me. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I am strong and healthy, and I have you to take care of me. Everything will be fine." And it was. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that proclaimed his displeasure at being evicted from his warm nest. Yates, who had assisted with countless animal births but had been terrified about human childbirth, found himself weeping as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," he said, tracing one finger down the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Beatrice said, exhausted but radiant, "and your stubborn chin." They named him James after Beatrice's father, and he proved to be a calm, happy baby who seemed to enjoy mountain life as much as his parents did. The dogs adored him, becoming his self-appointed guardians, and as he grew from baby to toddler, they followed him everywhere, patient with his unsteady hands and enthusiastic affection. The years rolled past in a rhythm of seasons, winters in the cabin, springs watching the mountain come alive, summers tending a garden Beatrice planted near the creek, autumns hunting and preserving food for the next winter. They went down to Verdi several times a year, maintaining connections with the town, and Martha Reynolds became an honorary grandmother to James. When James was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They named Thomas and Sarah. The cabin felt full now, bursting with life and noise and love. Yates expanded it, adding 2 more rooms and a larger loft, and the dogs accepted the new babies with the same patience they had shown James. "We have our own pack now," Beatrice said one evening, watching their 3 children play with the dogs while dinner cooked. "A real family." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said, pulling her close, "was catching you when you fell. Best decision I ever made was letting you." Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and lean times, illnesses that scared them, and accidents that reminded them how fragile life could be. When James was 7, he broke his arm falling from a tree, and Yates had to ride through a spring storm to fetch the doctor from Verdi. When the twins were 5, Boone died of old age, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the cabin with all the ceremony due a beloved family member. But the hard times were far outnumbered by the good ones. By long summer evenings with the children catching fireflies while Beatrice sang old songs. By winter mornings snuggled under quilts while snow piled against the windows. By the simple daily joy of living a life they had chosen, together. Yates never stopped marveling at the path his life had taken. The lonely mountain man had become a husband and father, and the isolated cabin had become a home filled with laughter and love. Beatrice had brought not just her skill with the dogs, but her whole self into his life, and in doing so, she had transformed everything. The dogs remained central to their lives. After Boone passed, they acquired new puppies, and Beatrice trained them with the same patient skill she had used on Rufus and Tracker. She taught James and the twins how to work with the dogs, passing down her father's knowledge to another generation. The Johnson pack became known throughout the region for having the best trained hunting dogs in Nevada, and people sometimes came up the mountain to ask Beatrice for training advice. She always welcomed them, sharing her knowledge freely, but she never charged for it. "My father taught me for free," she said. "I will do the same for others." When James was 10, Thomas and Sarah 8, and a 4th child, young William, was 2, Yates stood outside the cabin one summer evening and looked at the life they had built. The cabin was larger now, comfortable and well-maintained. The garden was flourishing. The barn housed several horses and a milk cow, and the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows. Beatrice came out to join him, wiping her hands on her apron. At 38, she was even more beautiful than she had been at 23, her face showing the character that came from years of genuine happiness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sliding her hand into his. "About how none of this would have happened if you had not gotten off that stage in Verdi 16 years ago, or if you had not been there to catch me when I fell. I will always catch you," Yates said, turning to look at her. "For as long as I live, I know." She leaned against him. They stood together in the fading light, watching the mountains turn purple in the dusk. "I used to think I came west to escape my old life, but really I came west to find my real life, to find you." "We found each other," Yates said, "and everything else followed." Rufus and Tracker, now elderly dogs moving slowly but still alert, came to sit at their feet. A new generation of dogs, 3 young coonhounds Beatrice had been training, tumbled past in a game of chase. Inside, the children were setting the table for dinner, their voices a cheerful chaos. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Beatrice asked. "When it was just you and the mountain?" Yates considered the question seriously. There were moments, rare ones, when he remembered the stark simplicity of those years alone, but they were memories only, not longings. "No," he said, "that was not really living. This is living." The years continued their steady march. The children grew. James developed his father's love for the mountains and his mother's way with animals, and by the time he was 16, he was leading hunting parties and earning a reputation as a guide. Thomas was quieter, more interested in books than trapping, and talked about going to San Francisco to become a teacher. Sarah had Beatrice's gift for training dogs and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her formidable. William, the youngest, was still finding his path, but he had a gentle soul and a gift for music, playing the fiddle Yates had bought him on a trip to Carson City. Beatrice had been right about the grandchildren, too. By the time Yates was 60, James had married a girl from Verdi and given them 3 grandchildren. And Sarah had married a rancher from California and brought him back to Nevada to start a horse breeding operation in the valley below the cabin. Thomas had indeed become a teacher in San Francisco, but returned every summer with his family, and William had opened a music shop in Reno while maintaining a small cabin near his parents for weekends and holidays. The cabin on the mountain, which had once been a refuge for a solitary man, had become the center of a sprawling family tree. Every Christmas, they all gathered there, 3 generations crowded into the expanded structure, and the sound of children's laughter filled the rooms while dogs dozed by the fire. On a clear autumn day, when Yates was 65 and Beatrice 60, they rode out together to check the trap lines, something they still did despite their children's protests that they should slow down. The current generation of Johnson hunting dogs, great-great-grandchildren of the original Rufus, Boone, and Tracker, ranged ahead of them, perfectly trained and perfectly obedient. "Remember when you told me you had spent 2 years trying to train those first dogs?" Beatrice said, laughing. "And I had them obeying by sunrise the next day? How could I forget? That was when I knew you were going to turn my whole life upside down, did I? Completely, and thank God for it." They reached the high meadow where they had first camped on the way up to the cabin all those years ago. The view was the same, the mountains rolling away in waves of blue and green, the sky impossibly wide. But everything else was different. "If you could go back," Yates said, "and talk to that exhausted woman who got off the stage in Verdi, what would you tell her?" Beatrice thought about it, her hand shading her eyes as she looked out at the vista. "I would tell her that everything she lost had to be lost so she could find what she was meant to have. That sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to the best ones, if we are brave enough to walk through." And if I could talk to that lonely mountain man watching from outside the general store, what would you tell him? I would tell him that the best thing that ever happened to him was about to walk into his life, and that catching her when she fell would be the moment everything changed. Beatrice turned to him, her eyes bright with emotion and love. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best," Yates said. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. What do you think happens next, when we are too old to ride up the mountain anymore? We teach the grandchildren everything we know, and we trust them to carry it forward. And we keep loving each other until the very last day, the same way we have loved each other from the first day." "That sounds perfect." They rode back to the cabin as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, Sarah having arrived earlier with her family for Sunday dinner. The sound of voices and laughter drifted out to meet them, and the dogs ran ahead, announcing their return. Yates helped Beatrice down from her horse, though she did not really need the help, and they stood there for a moment, hand in hand, looking at the life they had built together. The cabin that had once housed a lonely hermit now burst with family and love. The dogs that had once been wild and disobedient were now perfectly trained, their bloodline continuing through generations. The mountain that had been a hiding place had become a home. "I love you," Yates said, the words as true now as they had been 40 years ago when he first spoke them. "Every day I love you more." "And I love you," Beatrice said. "My mountain man, my heart, my home." They walked inside together, into the warmth and light and love, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had chosen. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, witness to all the seasons of their lives, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as they always had and always would. The story that had begun with a woman falling and a man catching her had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy of love and family, of patience and trust, of dogs trained with kindness and children raised with affection. It had become a life well lived, together, on a mountain that had finally found its purpose as the setting for their happiness. And when, many years later, Yates and Beatrice were finally laid to rest on the hill beside Boone and the other beloved dogs who had filled their lives, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together and told stories of the legendary couple who had built a dynasty from nothing but love and determination. They spoke of Beatrice's gift with dogs and Yates's strength and honor, and they promised to carry forward the lessons their grandparents had taught them. The cabin on the mountain remained in the family, passed down through generations, always a Johnson home. And in Verdi, Nevada, people still told the story of the woman who had stepped off the stage in 1872 and changed one lonely mountain man's life forever simply by being herself and showing up when he needed her most. It was a love story, pure and simple. The kind that happens once in a lifetime if you are lucky. The kind that starts with a fall and a catch and becomes everything. The kind that proves beyond any doubt that sometimes the best thing you can do is open your heart to a stranger, and let them become your whole world. And somewhere in the mountains of Nevada, where the pine trees grow thick and the stars shine bright and the dogs run free, the spirit of that love lives on, eternal as the mountains themselves, a testament to the power of two hearts finding each other against all odds and choosing, every single day, to love completely and without reservation. That was the story of Yates Johnson and Beatrice Nolan, the mountain man and the woman who had his hunting dogs obeying her by sunrise after he had spent 2 years trying the same thing. It was the story of how a skill with dogs became the bridge to a greater love. How patience and understanding in one area of life reflected wisdom and compassion in all others, and how two people who had given up on happiness found it in each other on a mountain in Nevada during the wild days of the American West. Their great-great-grandchildren still train dogs using Beatrice's methods, still live on the land Yates carved out of the wilderness, still tell the story of how it all began with a woman too tired to stand and a man strong enough to catch her, and the 3 stubborn coonhounds who brought them together. And every autumn, when the aspens turn gold and the first snow dusts the high peaks, the family gathers at the old cabin, now preserved as a memorial to Yates and Beatrice, and they raise their glasses in a toast to love, to dogs, to the mountain that sheltered their ancestors, and to the simple truth that sometimes the person who changes your life forever is the one you least expect, showing up at exactly the right moment, whether you know you need them or not. The end of their story was really just the beginning of a legacy that continued to grow and flourish, generation after generation, rooted in the love of 2 people who found each other in the Wild West and built something lasting and true. It was a happily ever after that extended far beyond their own lives, touching everyone who came after them, a ripple of love spreading outward through time. And in that way, Yates and Beatrice Johnson lived forever, not just in memory but in the continued existence of the family and the values they had created together, in the dogs trained with patience and love, in the mountain cabin that still stood strong against the elements, and in the hearts of every person who heard their story and believed, even for a moment, that true love really does exist, and that it is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth building a whole life around.